Okay, so now we are going to discuss the second argument that Rachel presents in support of the claim that active euthanasia is not morally impermissible. There are some cases where active euthanasia is morally permissible, right? And so the second argument basically just says that the conventional doctrine leads to decisions regarding life and death that are made on morally irrelevant grounds. Now, remember in the last video, we had this very strange example that Rachel's used regarding babies that are born with Down syndrome. And he used this example to illustrate the point that, at least in some cases, active euthanasia looks to be more humane than passive euthanasia. And remember that I mentioned there were some weird intuitive problems with the case. Maybe you just think that, you should never allow the parents to make the choice to not perform the operation that would save the baby with Down syndrome. Maybe we think the parents would be morally repugnant. Maybe they're moral monsters, something along these lines. Well, now Rachel's actually uses that point to his advantage. She's going to try to show that in a case like the one we just considered regarding a baby born Down syndrome, the kind of choice that's made is made on morally irrelevant grounds. That's the idea here. So let's take a look at what he says with regard to the second argument. Again, we're considering the Down syndrome baby case. So if the life is worth preserving, then what does it matter if an operation is needed? Intuitively, that seems pretty difficult to deny. That's kind of the idea that we're beginning with. If it is decided that the life of the baby's not worth living, then what does it matter if it just happens to need an operation? So if it happens to need an operation or not, if you don't want the baby with Down syndrome, it shouldn't matter whether or not there's an operation that it needs. So it looks like the choice that the parents are making not to perform the operation in this particular case, and remember that would be a form of passive euthanasia, that choice is being made on morally irrelevant grounds. Now, why would that be? Well, the decision not to perform the operation is not a morally relevant factor regarding the life and death of the baby. The baby did not have some congenital defect or infection or some other kind of obstruction, then it would likely go on to live a very healthy life. So the real issue that's involved here is simply that the baby has Down syndrome, right? The general idea is that it's the fact that the baby has Down syndrome, which is the morally relevant issue, not the fact that the baby needs an operation. And so the decision regarding the baby with Down syndrome's life or death is not made on any morally relevant ground. It's made on simply the fact that it needs an operation, which is, according to Rachel's, whether the baby should live or die in a case like this. Now, of course, this second argument is kind of interesting. Rachel's thinks that it's actually going to work to his advantage, though, but most people will tend to think that the sort of case that we're discussing is just absurd. And Rachel's thinks that it's the conventional doctrine that leads to this absurdity, since the conventional doctrine is the one that claims that passive euthanasia is sometimes permissible, but active euthanasia never is. So Rachel thinks that this is a good counterexample to the claim that passive euthanasia is sometimes permissible, but active euthanasia is not. So again, in a case like this, the morally relevant features of the case are not the fact that the baby needs an operation. It's the fact that the baby has Down syndrome. That's why the decisions we make, right? And that seems like it's just a completely absurd point. Rachel thinks that the absurdity that's involved here is brought out by the distinction between passive and active euthanasia in the first place. And so Rachel thinks that this is going to help him rather than be a real objection. It's grist for his mill, if you will, because again, it's a counterexample to the claim that passive euthanasia is sometimes morally permissible, but active euthanasia would not be. So the next argument is the one that we're really going to focus on. And it's in that third argument where Rachel's really attacks the distinction between what's described as killing versus letting die. And so that's what we will address in the next lecture.